Happy Sabbath, everyone. So, I will be participating in the CYMS program for this afternoon, your Youth Sabbath. The theme for this Youth Sabbath is Journey to the Promised Land, and of course, I will give my take on the theme as it relates to Journey to the Promised Land. My name is Latricia Deacon. Yes, and I am the Youth Director for this conference. So, the theme is Journey to the Promised Land, and in giving my take on the theme, I would like to speak to the question, why did it take the Israelites 40 years on a journey that should take them a few weeks? So I would like to answer that question in speaking on the journey to the Promised Land. Because the Israelites decided that they were going to test God. And they actually tested God not once, not twice, but they tested God 10 times. And these are accounts that are in the Bible. And we will go to that very soon. And after test number 10, then the Lord told them that because of what they have been doing, a consequence that they will have to pay is to be in the promised land, is to be in the wilderness for 40 years. Because at the time of the last test, which was test number 10, they were practically searching in the land for 40 days. And so God said, listen, for each day that you have been in the land, it will be equivalent to a year. So you have been here in the wilderness for 40 days. You shall be here for 40 years because of your disobedience. And that can be found in the Bible as well. So we will look at the different tests that the Israelites tested God. So test number 1. So remember, we're answering the question, why did they stay for 40 years on a journey that should actually take them a couple weeks? So the first test was when Moses was leading them from King Pharaoh, because God called Moses to go to King Pharaoh, and God had to send the 10 plagues in order for King Pharaoh to let his people go, because he was such a stubborn man. And so when he decided to let them go and they were gone, he changed his mind, and so he was after them. So when the Israelites, being led by Moses, reached the Red Sea, and they look and they saw the sea before them and the army behind them, they started to complain. And that can be found in Exodus 14 verses 10 to 12. So that's the first test where they started to complain, said it's best for why they didn't just stay in Egypt, and they're going to die out here at the sword, and so that was their first test. But what happened? Jesus did what? God did what, rather? God parted the Red Sea for them. So even though they were being disobedient and they complained, God showed mercy. So they tested God, and of course, God still showed mercy and showed that He is God and He's sovereign, and God parted the Red Sea for them. The next test number 2, can be found in Exodus 16 verses 1 through 3, right? No, test number 2 can be found in Exodus 15 verses 22 to 24. And this was when they wanted water and there was no water. So they reached the stream, but the water was bitter. And so the people were complaining. They were complaining about not having any water, and the water is bitter. Like, these people were never grateful for anything at all. And what God did, God showed Moses a tree that he could cut and put in the water, and the water became sweet. So even though they were complaining and they had no trust in God, God was still making a way for them. And you know that test and how God dealt with it, that can be found in Exodus 15. Test number 3 was when that can be found in Exodus 16 verses 1 to 3. They grew hungry. They wanted something to eat. And I don't know why, as anything happened, these people just start complaining. They don't know how to trust God. So even though God had led them through the Red Sea, and God had turned bitter water sweet, they're hungry, and they didn't remember that God did those two things for them. And of course they went off to test God again. And they complained and they murmur, and they vexed God. But what God did, God provided manna for them. Test number 4, that can be found in Exodus 16 verses 11 through 20, where God told them to just take enough for the day. God wanted to help them to be faithful and to learn to trust him. So God said, take enough for the day, because he will provide for them every day. But what some of the Israelites do, of course they tested God another time. Some of them took enough for 2 days, and what happened? It breeds worm. It wasn't good, right? And that can be found in Exodus 16 verses 11 to 20. But guess what happened? Even though they were disobedient to God, God still sends manna for them to eat. God fed them. Test number 5. God told the Israelites to gather enough manna for the Sabbath, because on the Sabbath is a day of rest, and so they should not go out to gather any manna. Were they obedient? Of course, some of them chose to be disobedient, and they went out to get manna. And what happened? It was no good. But what God did? What God did? He still, regardless of that, God continued to feed them. God never let them stay hungry. Test number 6. Again, the people complain about water, and God told. So is that God is always doing these things for them. This is when they were in the wilderness. Remember when they left King Pharaoh in Egypt, and they crossed the Red Sea, and they were in the wilderness, a journey that should take them a couple weeks, couple days, took them 40 years. And so on the way on their journey, couple days on their journey, these are the things that they were doing. Complaining. So test number 6 is when they complain about water again. Like, these people don't remember that God turned the bitter water into sweet water with just the cutting down of a tree. And so they complained, and God told Moses to speak to the rock. But Moses got tired himself of the Israelites complaining, and Moses' flesh took him over. That we have to fight with the flesh at times. So we have to feed the spiritual self and kill flesh. But there are some times when flesh get the better of us, and it did for Moses. And instead of speaking to the rock, he struck the rock. However, water still came, and the people could drink from the brook, from the fountain, and they had water. So even though they were complaining, God was still providing for them. Test number 7, and That test number 6, the account can be found in Exodus 17 verses 1 to 4. Test number 7 is when they camped at Mount Sinai, and then Moses went up to speak with God, and Moses was there for 40 days, and the people actually thought that Moses wasn't going to come back down. And what they did, they built a golden calf and worship an image, an idol, something that God warned them of, and they knew better not to do because they were Israelites. And so they did what? They built themselves a golden image, and God still showed them mercy. Right? God never destroyed them. God still showed them mercy. And that can be found in Exodus 32 verses 1 through to 6. Test number 8, and remember, these are all happening fast after one after the other. So it's not like after they do a year. No, these are all happening days apart. Days apart. So these people, they complain a lot, and they tend to forget so easily what God has done for them. And so test 8 is where the Israelites, they were complaining. It wasn't specific in what they were complaining about, and it infuriates God. This can be found in Numbers 11 verses 1 to 3. And what God did, God burned some of them with fire. So God was still merciful. God, they all deserved to die, but God did not kill all of them. God destroyed some of them because their complaint infuriates God, and God wanted to teach them a lesson. But in teaching them a lesson, God is still merciful because all were not lost. Test number 9 is when, Lord have mercy, imagine it, God was feeding these people and helping them to go to the promised land, a land that He promised them. And God was providing food for them. Now they start to complain about eating manna every day. So they test God again. And every time they complain and they murmur and then be ungrateful, they're actually testing God. But God, what happened? A quail flown in, and they could eat, they could feed on it. But what happened while, because God allowed them to eat quail, and then what happened after? Some of them even die while eating it. But at the same time, God still provided something different for them to eat. That can be found in Numbers 11 verses 4 through to 34. Now the final test now, this was what put the icing on the cake. When the spies, Moses sent spies to view the promised land, and of course a spy from every tribe. So 12 tribes were represented. So 12 spies went, and they came back, and they actually lied and exaggerate about the things that they saw as it relates to giants, and they were like grasshoppers in their own sight. And the people test God again by complaining that, listen, God, bring us out here now for us to see our wives and our children being killed in front of our eyes. And they were complaining. And that's when that can be found in Numbers 14 verses 1 to 4. And that's when the Lord intervened now and said, listen, because of all your murmurings, this is the final decision. So I'm going to read this part in closing as it relates to my partake on the topic Journey to the Promised Land. So after the 10 tests, that the Israelites put to God and how God has delivered them. This is the God's final saying. It can be found in Numbers 14 verses 27 through 30. You can read to the end, but I'll stop at 34. How long shall I bear with this evil congregation, which murmur against me? I have heard the murmurings of the children of Israel, which they murmur against me. Say unto them, As truly as I live, saith the Lord, as he hath spoken in mine ears, so will I do to you. Your carcasses shall fall in this wilderness, and all that were numbered of you, according to your whole number, from 20 years old and upward, which have murmured against me, doubtless ye shall not come into the land, concerning which I swear to make you dwell therein, save Caleb the son of Jephunneh and Joshua the son of Nun. But your little ones, which he said should be a prey, them will I bring in, and they shall know the land